first became mayor, it was extremely important for me to increase the level of transparency and accountability on city council in general, and particularly concerning lobbying and concerning expenses. So I immediately started disclosing people with whom I meet, as well as my line by line expenses. I think this is important to do, and I'm happy that council continues to do this work. I think that we've got reasonable policies in place around things like, can you expense alcohol? Can you take your council colleagues out for drinks? The answer is no. But you can expense it if there are other people present. When it comes to FCM and other travel, I try to keep my own expenses as reasonable as possible. I do take council out for dinner a couple times a year, including one time usually at FCM. This year we went to an extremely fancy burger and shakes place. It was actually very good. And so I think that stuff does matter, and I think that there is something to be said for the ability to host. And sometimes other mayors host me, sometimes I host other mayors in all of this, but I think you have to be extremely prudent and you have to be extremely reasonable. The taxpayer should not be on the hook to pay for you to go for drinks with your buddies. And even if you are legitimately hosting others, there should be a purpose to it. So at FCM this year, I actually did have dinner with a couple of other mayors prior to our big city mayors meeting to talk about the agenda items and what our basic lobbying position was going to be. While at FCM this year, I had the opportunity to sit down with the Prime Minister and have a very productive meeting, and my FCM really consists of that. It consists of a lot of bilateral meetings with decision makers in government and in opposition in order to be able to move forward. So I think there's huge value in councillors attending, but I also believe that you have to be incredibly responsible with every penny of your expense allowance, with every penny that you're spending on behalf of taxpayers. Sometimes people laugh at me because occasionally I will take a volunteer staffer out for dinner on a weekend, and they're super lucky if it goes past A&W. It gets even fancier than that. That's an important way of saying thank you to volunteers for giving their time, but again, being very, very prudent.
One other aspect of that, though, that I'd like to address is that travel expenses that are charged to corporate costs as opposed to individual council ward budgets, and I know it's different for your office.
Yes.
But council travel expenses charged to corporate costs aren't disclosed anywhere. Should that change?
I actually did not know that until I read your column or your piece today. That's helpful for me to understand. Yeah, I think so. In my case, I don't charge my travel to corporate budgets. It all comes through my office, so that all gets disclosed anyway. But I think that's a very helpful change for us to look at.
Because you're big on governance matters, sir, does OSIF need some changes to prevent people who leave its board being involved with companies that they don't want for money?
That's an interesting question, and certainly in a business environment like Calgary's, where frankly the business community and the investor community is not that big, when we want to have really great people sit on the OSIF board, sometimes conflicts of interest can happen, and they are declared. So I think that piece is working really well. Now, this interesting question about should there be a cooling off period, I think is worth discussing. Now, interestingly, if the member in question had been on the board and had declared a conflict through the board's existing procedures, it would have been fine to consider the item. What's interesting here is that he wasn't on the board, so he didn't have to declare that conflict. So I think this is really a technical issue more than anything else, but I know that the OSIF governance mandate is being looked at by the audit committee anyway, by the city auditor, I should say, anyway. So I look forward to seeing what they come up with. I'm always interested in improving things.
What do you think is a reasonable cooling off period?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I think the critical thing here is not so much the restriction as the disclosure. That the board, the decision makers, and the public need to know what relationships may or may not exist. Because as I say, if he was still on the board, we still would have considered it. It just would have been that he would have declared publicly that there was a conflict.
And one final point on that, did you see any problems with the CEO having full authority up to 150,000?
No, I think that makes sense because you want the professional staff to have some sort of ability to put the smaller ones through instead of spending $50,000 on doing due diligence on a $100,000 request.
On the capital budget that we just saw this morning, as the committee looking at, is this further fallout from the budget? So what kind of position is the city in now, given
Well, the good news is that the city is in very good financial position. It's always been in a very good financial position. The problem here is there's less money. And so citizens are actually going to see the results of the UCP government reneging on its commitment to hold on to the fiscal framework. We had already taken a huge cut in our capital grants under the NDP government. And in the spring, the UCP candidates said that they would hold on to the NDP's framework. And in fact, they didn't. They gave us another 10% cut. So we will now get back to 2017 levels of capital grants probably sometime in the mid to late 2030s. And so citizens will see an impact. So there was a $100 million cut to a program that was buying new train cars for the C train, which means those old U2 cars are going to have to give us even more miles. Or if they actually have to be pulled out of service because they just don't work anymore, it means there will be 3-car trains where there were 4-car trains. There's no way around that. And it also means that the trains that we did buy cost us more because we had to make a smaller order. That's penny wise, pound foolish. In addition to that, there's been a $75 million cut to our general capital funding. Some of that we'll be able to make up. Some of that is through we've brought so many projects in under budget, so we were able to actually use some of that money to mitigate the impact of that cut. But ultimately, there's still a fair bit of money that's going to be in projects deferred, in intersections and interchanges being built later or not at all, and in some projects being canceled. Yeah, I am. There's a sub $1 million cut in affordable housing, which is a pretty small program. And so what looks like perhaps not a very big cut could actually have a very big impact. And so I'm really interested in learning more about what that means to actual construction of affordable housing units. And I didn't get an answer today, that's okay. We'll be talking about that next week. So I encourage the public to take a look at this report. It's a short report, and see what you think about the capital budget. Submit written submissions to the clerk this week, and we will invite people, if they'd like to come to council to talk about the capital budget on Tuesday, time TBD.
On the expenses question, if I could go back, you talked about being prudent. Was this a case of a person not being prudent?
Well, you know, the chair of the coordinating committee of the councillor's office who signs off on these expenses refused to sign off on the expenses. And I think that tells you the answer to that question.
Does the province need to strike a task force on tax assessment?
Yes, but it has to be broad. It has to be a conversation about assessment and taxation. It has, as I've said many, many times, the solution to our problem lies in broad-based tax reform. And that is really what we need. So we have to make sure that this idea that I only heard about this morning is an idea that is well thought out, and that really dovetails nicely with existing work and existing advocacy going on.
Tomorrow, in the Green Line Committee, do we get to see the options or not?
No, I don't think so.
Put out and then you guys are going to...
Then you guys would.
You might be right. I'll find out.